The dusty town of Willow Creek had seen better days. Sarah Mitchell stood on the wooden porch of her family's general store, watching the tumbleweeds roll down the empty main street. At 23, she had grown tired of the same faces, the same conversations, and the same predictable life that stretched ahead of her like an endless prairie. Her father, Thomas Mitchell, had built the store from nothing after the war. Now it was one of the few businesses still thriving in their small town. Sarah helped him run it, serving the local ranchers, farmers, and occasional travelers who passed through. I had turned down 3 marriage proposals in the past 2 years, much to her father's dismay. None of those men had made her heart skip a beat, or her mind wonder about adventures beyond the horizon. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Sarah was arranging bolts of fabric when she heard the sound of hooves on the dirt road. She glanced up to see a lone rider approaching slowly. The man sat tall in his saddle, his wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over his face. Beautiful chestnut mare, moved with the easy grace of an animal well cared for and trusted. The rider dismounted outside the store and tied his horse to the hitching post. Sarah found herself smoothing her apron and tucking a loose strand of brown hair behind her ear. She rarely cared about her appearance during work hours, but something about this stranger made her suddenly conscious of how she looked. The man stepped through the door, removing his hat to reveal thick, dark hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. He was handsome in a rugged way, with sun-weathered skin that spoke of long days outdoors and a quiet confidence in his movements. Sarah guessed he was close to 30, with the kind of face that suggested he had seen both joy and sorrow. "Good morning, miss," he said, his voice deep and warm. "I'm hoping you might have some supplies I need." "Of course," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "What can I help you find?" He pulled a piece of paper from his shirt pocket and unfolded it carefully. "I need coffee, beans, salt, and some rope, if you have it. Also wondering if there's a blacksmith in town. My horse needs new shoes." Sarah gathered his supplies. She found herself stealing glances at him. He stood, patiently, his hat in his hands, occasionally looking around the store with interest. When their eyes met, he smiled, and Sarah felt something flutter in her chest that she had never experienced before. "You're not from around here," she said, more as a statement than a question. "No, ma'am. Name's Jake Carson. I'm passing through. On my way to Colorado. Heard there's work on the cattle drives heading north." "That's a long journey," Sarah said, wrapping his purchases in brown paper. "Where are you coming from?" "Texas originally. It's been traveling for the better part of 3 months now." Jake's expression grew distant. "Sometimes a man needs to find a new place to call home." There was something in his tone that suggested pain, but Sarah didn't pry. Instead, she told him about the blacksmith, old Pete Johnson, who worked out of a small shop behind the church. Jake thanked her and paid for his supplies, his fingers briefly touching hers as he took the packages. "Much obliged, Miss Mitchell." "Sarah Mitchell." "Miss Mitchell." He said her name like he was tasting something sweet. "Thank you for your kindness." Jake was about to leave when Thomas Mitchell emerged from the back room, wiping his hands. On a rag, Sarah's father was a good judge of character, and she watched nervously as he studied the stranger. "You're new in town," Thomas said, extending his hand. "Tom Mitchell." "This is my daughter, Sarah." "Carson, sir." "Just passing through, but I appreciate the hospitality." The 2 men shook hands, and Sarah noticed her father's approving nod. Thomas had a way of sizing up a person quickly, and it seemed Jake had passed whatever test her father had silently administered. "If you're looking for a hot meal, Mary's Diner down the street serves the best beef stew this side of the Mississippi," Thomas offered. "That sounds mighty fine, Mr. Mitchell. It's been a while since I've had a home-cooked meal." As Jake prepared to leave again, Sarah found herself speaking without thinking. "Will you be staying in town long?" Jake paused at the door and turned back to her. "Just tonight, I expect. Early start tomorrow." Sarah nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. She had no reason to feel sad about a stranger moving on. It was what travelers did. But something about Jake Carson had stirred feelings she didn't fully understand. After he left, Thomas looked at his daughter with knowing eyes. "Seems like a decent man," he said casually. "I suppose," Sarah replied, but she found herself moving to the window to watch Jake lead his horse toward the blacksmith shop. That evening, Sarah took longer than usual preparing dinner. She chose her best dress, a blue cotton one that brought out her eyes, and spent extra time arranging her hair. When her father commented on her appearance, she claimed she simply felt like dressing nicely. They were finishing their meal when a knock came at the door. Sarah's heart jumped, though she told herself it could be anyone. Thomas opened the door to find Jake Carson standing on their porch, hat in hand once again. "Evening, Mr. Mitchell. I hope I'm not disturbing your supper." "Not at all, son. Come in." Jake stepped inside, and his eyes immediately found Sarah. "I wanted to thank you both again for your help today. Pete got my horse fixed up, and I had that meal you recommended." "You were right about Mary's cooking. Glad to hear it," Thomas said. "Coffee." As her father poured coffee, Sarah found herself studying Jake's profile in the lamplight. There was something both strong and gentle about him, a combination that drew her in despite her better judgment. They talked for an hour about travel, the changing times, and life in small towns. Jake was a good listener and had interesting stories about the places he had seen. When he finally stood to leave, Sarah walked him to the door while her father cleared the dishes. On the porch, Jake turned to her. "Thank you for a pleasant evening." Sarah. The way he said her name made her pulse quicken. In the soft moonlight, his eyes seemed to hold secrets she wanted to discover. Sarah woke before dawn, though she couldn't explain why. Her window faced east, and she could see the first hints of orange painting the horizon. Jake would be leaving this morning, riding away from Willow Creek and out of her life forever. The thought sat heavy in her chest like a stone. She dressed quickly and made her way to the kitchen, where she found her father already drinking coffee and reading his weekly newspaper. Thomas looked up at her with raised eyebrows. "You're up early, daughter." "Couldn't sleep," Sarah admitted, pouring herself a cup of coffee. The bitter liquid did nothing to ease the strange emptiness she felt. "What? Might have something to do with our visitor last night," Thomas said gently. "He seems like a fine man, Sarah, but he's a drifter. Men like that don't often settle down." Sarah nodded, knowing her father spoke the truth. Still, she found herself watching the road through the kitchen window, hoping to catch one last glimpse of Jake Carson before he disappeared forever. An hour later, as she was opening the store, Sarah spotted Jake leading his horse down the main street. Her heart began to race. He was dressed for travel, his saddlebags packed and ready. This was it. He would ride past the store and continue on his journey to Colorado. But instead of riding past, Jake stopped in front of the store and tied his horse to the post. Sarah quickly smoothed her hair and tried to look busy arranging items on the counter. The door opened, and Jake stepped inside, filling the small space with his presence. "Morning, Sarah," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Good morning. I thought you'd be on the road by now." Jake shifted his weight from one foot to the other, as if he was uncertain about something. I intended to be." He paused, running his hand through his hair. "I rode about 5 miles out of town before I turned back." Sarah's heart skipped. "Is something wrong? Did you forget something?" "You could say that." Jake stepped closer to the counter. "I couldn't stop thinking about last night, about talking with you and your father. It's been a long time since I felt so welcome somewhere." "We enjoyed your company too," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small object. "I wanted to give you this before I left." He placed it on the counter between them. Sarah looked down to see a smooth river stone, perfectly round and polished to a shine. It was beautiful in its simplicity, dark gray with flecks of gold catching the morning light. "I found it by a stream in New Mexico," Jake explained. "Carried it with me for good luck. But I think you should have it now." Sarah picked up the stone, feeling its cool weight in her palm. "I can't take your good luck charm." "Maybe my luck is changing," Jake said quietly. "Maybe I need different kinds of luck now." Their eyes met across the counter, and Sarah felt the air between them charged with unspoken possibilities. She wanted to ask him to stay, to give Willow Creek a chance, but she couldn't find the words. Women didn't ask such things of men, especially men they had known for less than 24 hours. "There's something else," Jake said. "The reason I left Texas. I think you should know." Sarah set the stone down gently and gave him her full attention. "I was engaged to be married," Jake began. Her name was Elizabeth. We had known each other since we were children, and everyone expected we would marry, including me. His jaw tightened. 3 days before the wedding, I found her with another man. Turned out she had been seeing him for months. Sarah's heart ached for him. "I'm sorry, Jake. That must have been terrible." It was. But not for the reasons you might think. Jake looked out the window at his horse waiting patiently in the morning sun. I was hurt, sure, angry, but mostly I was relieved. I realized I had been going through the motions, doing what was expected, instead of following my heart. "So you left?" "Packed everything I owned and started riding. Told myself I was looking for work, for a new start. Duh. But really, I was looking for something I couldn't name." He turned back to her. "Until yesterday." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "What did you find yesterday?" Jake moved around the counter, closing the distance between them. Sarah didn't step back, though her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "I found a reason to want to stay somewhere," he said. "I found someone who makes me want to build something instead of just drifting from place to place." "Jake," Sarah whispered. "I know it's crazy," he continued. "I know we just met. But I've never felt anything like what I felt sitting at your dinner table last night. Listening to you laugh, watching the way you care about your father and this town." Sarah's mind was spinning. Everything he was saying aligned with the strange feelings that had kept her awake all night. But it was all happening so fast. "What are you saying?" she asked. Jake reached up and gently touched her cheek. "I'm saying maybe Colorado can wait. Maybe I could find work here in Willow Creek. If there's a chance that someday you might feel the same way about me that I'm beginning to feel about you." Sarah closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. When she opened them again, Jake was studying her face with an intensity that made her knees weak. "There's Mr. Henderson's ranch," she said quietly. "He's always looking for good hands. And the Johnson brothers need help with their cattle." Jake smiled, the first truly joyful smile she had seen from him. "Is that a yes?" Before Sarah could answer, the door opened and Thomas Mitchell walked in. He stopped short when he saw Jake standing so close to his daughter, but his expression remained neutral. "Morning, Jake. Thought you'd be long gone by now." "Change of plans, sir," Jake said, stepping back but not looking embarrassed. "I was hoping. You might give me some advice about finding work in the area." Thomas looked between Jake and Sarah, taking in their flushed faces and the obvious tension in the air. A slow smile spread across his weathered face. "Well now," he said. "That's interesting news. Sarah, why don't you put on some fresh coffee? I think the three of us need to have a talk." As Sarah moved to prepare the coffee, she caught Jake's eye. He winked at her, and she felt a bubble of happiness rise in her chest. Maybe some travelers were meant to stop wandering. Maybe some stones were meant to be given away so that new kinds of luck could take root and grow. 3 months had passed since Jake Carson decided to stay in Willow Creek. True to his word, he'd found work at the Henderson Ranch, proving himself to be one of the most reliable hands old Henry Henderson had ever hired. Jake had a natural way with horses and cattle. And his experience from traveling through different territories made him valuable for solving problems that stumped the local ranchers. Sarah found herself looking forward to Jake's visits to the store, which happened almost daily. Sometimes he needed supplies for the ranch, but often he came by just to talk. Their friendship had grown steadily, built on shared conversations about books, dreams, and the small happenings of daily life in their quiet town. Jake had rented a small room above the barber shop, and slowly the people of Willow Creek had accepted him as one of their own. He helped neighbors with repairs, joined the volunteer fire brigade, and even played fiddle at the church social gatherings. But despite all this, Sarah sensed he was holding something back, keeping a careful distance between them, even as their connection deepened. On this particular autumn morning, Sarah was sweeping the front porch when she saw Jake riding toward town, but something was different. Instead of his usual calm demeanor, he looked urgent, almost troubled. His horse was breathing hard, as if they had ridden fast from the ranch, Jake dismounted quickly and approached her with long strides. "Sarah, I need to talk to your father. Is he here? He's in the back room doing inventory?" "Jake, what's wrong? You look upset. There's been some trouble at the ranch. Cattle rustlers hit us last night. Took about 50 head. Sarah's hand flew to her throat. Rustlers were a serious problem in these parts. They were often violent men who wouldn't hesitate to hurt anyone who got in their way. Was anyone hurt? No, thank God. But Henderson wants to form a posse to go after them. The sheriff's putting together a group of men to ride out this afternoon. Thomas Mitchell emerged from the back room, having heard their conversation.
Ow.
Many men are we talking about, Jake? Maybe a dozen rustlers, from what we can tell by the tracks. They're well armed and have a good head start, but Sheriff Barnes thinks we can catch up to them before they reach the border. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. You're going with them? Jake nodded grimly. Henderson's paying me good wages. It's my job to protect his cattle, and that includes getting them back when they're stolen. But it's dangerous, Sarah protested. These men are killers, Jake. What if something happens to you? The look that passed between them was charged with unspoken feelings. Jake stepped closer to Sarah, his gray eyes intense. I have to go, Sarah. A man doesn't run from his responsibilities. Thomas cleared his throat. Jake's right, daughter. This is what needs to be done. He extended his hand to Jake. You be careful out there, son. Come back safe. Jake shook Thomas's hand, then turned back to Sarah. Can I talk to you for a minute?
Alone?
Thomas nodded and went back inside, leaving them standing together on the porch. Jake took Sarah's hands in his, and she noticed they were trembling slightly. I don't know how long we'll be gone, he said. Could be a few days, could be longer. But Sarah, there's something I need to tell you before I leave. Sarah's heart was racing. What is it? Jake looked down at their joined hands, then back up at her face. These past 3 months have been the best of my life. Getting to know you. Working here in Willow Creek, feeling like I belong somewhere for the first time since I was a boy. Jake, let me finish, he said gently. I've been trying to take things slow, to be respectful, but I can't leave without you knowing how I feel. I'm in love with you, Sarah. Completely, desperately in love with you. Sarah's breath caught. She had hoped to dream that he felt the same way she did. But hearing the words spoken aloud made everything real in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. I love you too, she whispered. I have for weeks now. Jake's face transformed with joy and relief. He pulled her closer, and Sarah could feel the warmth of his body, smell the familiar scent of leather and soap that she had come to associate with safety and comfort. When I come back, Jake said, I want to talk to your father properly. I want to ask for your hand in marriage, if you'll have me. Tears sprang to Sarah's eyes. Of course I'll have you. I can't imagine my life without you now.
Ow.
Jake reached up and cupped her face in his hands. They were standing very close now, close enough that Sarah could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes, could count every line that the sun and wind had etched around them. Would it be wrong if I kissed you now? He whispered. The question hung in the air between them like a promise. Sarah had never been kissed by a man she loved, had never wanted anything more in her entire life. She looked into his eyes and saw her own longing reflected there. No, she breathed. It wouldn't be wrong. Jake leaned down slowly, giving her time to change her mind. But Sarah had never been more certain of anything. When his lips finally touched hers, it was like coming home and setting off on an adventure at the same time. The kiss was gentle. At first tentative, but as Sarah responded, it deepened into something that spoke of promises and hope and a future they would build together. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Jake rested his forehead against hers, his hands still framing her face. That's what I'll remember while I'm gone, he said. That's what will bring me back to you. You have to come back, Jake, Sarah said fiercely. You have to come back safe. Will, I promise you I will. The sound of horses approaching made them step apart. Sheriff Barnes and 3 other men were riding up the street, armed and ready for the trail. Jake squeezed Sarah's hands one more time. I love you, he said. I love you too. Be careful. Jake mounted his horse and joined the other men. As they rode out of town, he turned back once to look at Sarah standing on the porch. She raised her hand in farewell, clutching the river stone he had given her in her other hand. Thomas came out to stand beside his daughter as they watched the dust cloud kicked up by the horses disappear in the distance. "He's a good man, Sarah," Thomas said quietly. "He'll come back to you." Sarah nodded, but as the day wore on and evening approached, she found herself thinking about Jake's whispered question and the kiss that had sealed their promise to each other. She touched her lips, remembering the moment, and whispered a prayer that he would return safely so they could begin their life together. But in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered that some men who rode out after rustlers never came home at all. 5 days passed without word from the posse. Sarah tried to keep herself busy with the daily tasks of running the store. But every sound of approaching horses made her heart leap with hope that quickly turned to disappointment when the riders proved to be someone else. The other women in town who had men on the posse were equally anxious, gathering at Mary's diner each afternoon to share their worries and support each other. On the 6th morning, Sarah was arranging a display of canned goods when she heard a commotion outside. Shouts and the sound of multiple horses filled the air. She rushed to the window and saw them. The posse was returning. Her heart hammered as she counted the riders. Searching desperately for Jake's familiar figure, she could see Sheriff Barnes in the lead, and there was Henderson and the Johnson brothers. But where was Jake? Sarah pressed her face against the glass, straining to make out each man in the group. Finally, at the back of the group, she spotted him. Jake was slumped in his saddle, supported by another rider, and even from a distance, she could see the dark stain of blood on his shirt. Sarah flew out of the store, her apron streaming behind her as she ran toward the approaching men. "Jake!" she cried out. The posse had stopped in front of Doc Miller's office. Jake was conscious but pale, his left arm hanging useless at his side. When he saw Sarah running toward him, he tried to straighten up and managed a weak smile. "I kept my promise," he said as she reached him. "I came back." "You're hurt," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. She reached up to touch his leg, the only part of him she could reach while he was still mounted. "It's not as bad as it looks," Jake assured her, though his voice was strained with pain. "Bullet went clean through my shoulder." Doc Miller and Thomas Mitchell, who had heard the noise and come running, helped Jake down from his horse. Sarah supported his good arm as they got him into the doctor's office and onto the examining table. "Everyone out except Sarah," Doc Miller commanded.
I need room to work."
As the doctor cleaned and examined Jake's wound, Jake told them what had happened. They had tracked the rustlers for 3 days, finally catching up to them near the Mexican border. A fierce gun battle had ensued, while they had recovered most of Henderson's cattle and captured half the rustlers. The rest had escaped across the border, where the posse couldn't follow. "Jake here saved Henderson's life," Doc Miller said. As he worked, took a bullet that was meant for the old man. Sarah squeezed Jake's good hand, overwhelmed with pride and terror at how close she had come to losing him. "You could have been killed," she whispered. "But I wasn't," Jake replied, looking directly into her eyes. "I had too much to come home to." Doc Miller finished his work and stepped back, wiping his hands on a towel. "The bullet went clean through, missed the bone. You'll be sore for a few weeks, but you'll heal up fine if you rest and don't try to use that arm too much." "How long before I can get back to work?" Jake asked. 6 weeks at least. Maybe 2 months before you're back to full strength." Jake's face fell. "Henderson's not going to want to pay a hand who can't work." "Actually," came a voice from the doorway, "Henderson's going to do a lot more than that." They all turned to see the old rancher himself standing in the doorway, hat in hand. Henry Henderson was a man of few words, but when he spoke, people listened. "Jake Carson," Henderson said, stepping into the room. "You saved my life out there. Took a bullet that had my name on it. I don't forget debts like that." Jake tried to sit up straighter. "Just doing my job, sir." "Hell no, it wasn't just your job," Henderson said gruffly. "Your job was to help get my cattle back. Jumping in front of a gun aimed at me was something else entirely." He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is the deed to the old Murphy place. 500 acres, good grazing land, and a house that just needs some fixing up. It's yours." Sarah gasped. The Murphy place had been abandoned for 2 years since old Sean Murphy died without any family to inherit it. It was beautiful land, with a creek running through it and views of the distant mountains. Jake stared at Henderson in shock. "Sir, I can't accept that. It's too much." "You can and you will," Henderson said firmly. "A man who's willing to die for you deserves more than wages. Besides, I'm getting too old to run my spread alone. I was thinking maybe we could work out a partnership arrangement. You run your cattle on your land, I'll run mine on mine, but we help each other out when needed." Sarah looked between the two men, her heart swelling with joy and possibility. Jake owning his own land meant he would never have to drift again. It meant they could build a real future together. "What do you say, Jake?" Henderson asked. "Will you be my neighbor?" Jake looked at Sarah, and she nodded encouragingly.
"Yes, sir,"
Jake said finally. "I'd be honored." Henderson smiled. The first time Sarah had ever seen the stern old man's face. "Light up. Good. Now you get yourself healed up, and we'll get started on those repairs to the Murphy house. Can't have you bring in a bride home to a place that's falling down." Sarah blushed furiously at the mention of being Jake's bride, but she didn't correct Henderson's assumption. After Jake's declaration of love before he left, and the kiss they had shared, she knew it was only a matter of time before he formally proposed. After Henderson left, Doc Miller gave them instructions for caring for Jake's wound and told him to rest for at least a week before even thinking about doing anything strenuous. Thomas offered to let Jake stay in their spare room so Sarah could help take care of him, and Jake gratefully accepted. That evening, as Sarah helped Jake settle into the small bedroom off the kitchen, he caught her hand and pulled her down too. "Sit on the edge of the bed." "Sarah," he said softly, "I meant what I said before I left. When I'm healed up and the house is ready, I want to marry you. Will you have me?" Sarah's heart overflowed with happiness. "Yes, Jake Carson, I'll marry you." Jake reached up with his good hand and touched her cheek, just as he had done that morning. On the porch, when he asked if he could kiss her, "Would it be wrong if I kissed you now?" he whispered, echoing his words from before. Sarah leaned down and pressed her lips to his, answering him without words. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. "I was so scared I'd lost you," she whispered. "Never," Jake promised. "I'll never leave you again, Sarah. We're going to build something beautiful together," as Sarah tucked the blankets around him and kissed his forehead goodnight. She knew that their real adventure was just beginning. They had land, they had love, and most importantly, they had each other. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight Jake was safe in her care, and their future stretched ahead of them like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. 2 months had passed since Jake's injury, and his shoulder had healed stronger than ever. The wedding was planned for the following spring, giving them time to make the Murphy house ready for a new family. Every day after work, Jake would ride over to help with repairs, and Sarah would join him in the evenings, bringing dinner and staying to help plan how they would arrange their future home. The old Murphy place was coming alive again under their care. Jake had fixed the roof, replaced broken windows, and painted the exterior a cheerful yellow that Sarah had chosen. Inside, they had refinished the wooden floors and painted the walls in warm colors that would make the house feel welcoming. Sarah had been sewing curtains and planning where her mother's furniture would go. They married. On this particular October evening, Sarah arrived at the house to find Jake sitting on the front porch steps, staring out at the sunset painting. The sky in shades of orange and pink, he looked troubled, which was unusual for him lately. Since accepting Henderson's generous gift and proposal of partnership, Jake had been happier than Sarah had ever seen him. "You're early tonight, Jake," said as she approached, but his smile seemed forced. "I finished my work at the store early and thought we could start on the kitchen cupboards," Sarah replied, settling beside him on the steps. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Jake was quiet for a long moment, rolling something between his fingers. Sarah looked down and saw it was a letter, the envelope torn open and the paper worn from handling. "I got some news today," Jake said finally. "A letter from Texas." Sarah's stomach clenched. Jake rarely talked about his past, and she had learned not to push him for details about the life he had left behind. But she had always worried that someday his past might catch up to them. "What kind of news?" she asked gently. Jake handed her the letter. Maybe you should read it yourself." With trembling hands, Sarah unfolded the paper and read the careful, feminine handwriting. "Dear Jake, I hope this letter finds you well. It took me some time to track down where you had gone, but mutual friends finally told me you were in Colorado territory. I have something important to tell you, and I couldn't let any more time pass without you knowing the truth. I was wrong to betray you the way I did. I was young and foolish and scared of settling down. I thought there was something better out there for me, something more exciting than the quiet life we had planned. The man I left you for turned out to be a liar and a thief. He disappeared one night with what little money my family had saved, leaving me with nothing but shame and regret. I realized too late what I had given up when I lost you. I know I have no right to ask anything of you after what I did, but I'm hoping you might find it in your heart to give me another chance. I've learned from my mistakes, Jake. I know now that what we had was real and good, and I threw it away for a fantasy that turned out to be nothing but smoke. If there's any part of you that still cares for what we once meant to each other, please come home. I'm waiting for you, and I always will be. All my love." Elizabeth. Sarah read the letter twice, her heart sinking with each word. When she finished, she carefully folded it and handed it back to Jake. She tried to keep her voice steady when she spoke. "When did you get this?" "This morning. Pete the blacksmith brought it over when he came to shoe Henderson's horses." "And what are you going to do?" Jake looked at her with surprise. "What do you mean? What am I going to do? You're going back to Texas? Are you going to give her another chance?" The words tasted bitter in Sarah's mouth, but she had to ask. Jake stood up abruptly and began pacing in front of the porch. "Sarah, how can you even ask me that? After everything we've shared, everything we've planned together?" "Because she was your first love," Sarah said quietly. "Because you were going to marry her. Because maybe you never really got over her. And now she wants you back." Jake stopped pacing and stared at her. "Is that really what you think of me? That I'm the kind of man who would abandon the woman he loves because an old flame decided she made a mistake?" Sarah stood up to her emotions, finally spilling over. "I don't know what to think, Jake. This letter changes everything. She's asking you to come home. In Texas is your real home, isn't it? This is just a place you ended up when you were running away from her. This is my home now," Jake said firmly. "Or my home. Sarah, look at me." She looked up at him, tears threatening to spill down her cheeks. Jake stepped closer and took her hands in his. "That letter doesn't change anything for me," he said. "Elizabeth is part of my past, and she's going to stay there. When I left Texas, I wasn't just running. From what she did to me, I was running toward something I couldn't name at the time. Now I know what it was. I was running toward you." Sarah searched his face, looking for any sign of doubt or uncertainty. But what if you regret it someday? What if you wonder what might have been? Jake released her hands and cupped her face gently. "Sarah Mitchell, I've never been more certain of anything in my entire life. Elizabeth had her chance, and she chose someone else. I'm not the same man who loved her back then. The man I am now loves you, completely and forever. What are you going to tell her?" "Nothing," Jake said firmly. "Not going to answer that letter at all. She doesn't deserve a response, and more importantly, she's not part of my life anymore. You are." Sarah felt relief wash over her, followed immediately by shame for doubting him. "I'm sorry, Jake. I shouldn't have questioned you. It's just that when I read her letter, I got so scared of losing you." "You're never going to lose me," Jake promised. "But I understand why the letter upset you. If I'd gotten a letter from some man professing his love for you, I'd probably want to ride to wherever he was and punch him in the face." Despite everything, Sarah found herself smiling at that image. "You would not." "Oh, I absolutely would," Jake said with mock seriousness. "I'm very possessive when it comes to my future wife." The word wife sent a thrill through Sarah that helped chase away the last of her fears. Jake pulled her closer and wrapped his arms around her. "Would it be wrong if I kissed you now?" He whispered, using the words that had become their private phrase, the question he had asked before their first kiss when he was leaving with the posse. "It's never wrong when you kiss me," Sarah replied, standing on her toes to meet him halfway. Their kiss was different this time, deeper, more urgent. filled with the relief of a crisis past and the certainty of their commitment to each other. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I have an idea," Jake said suddenly. "What kind of idea?" "What if we don't wait until spring to get married? What if we move the wedding up to Christmas? The house will be ready by then, and I don't. Want to spend another winter wondering if you're going to change your mind about marrying a drifter?" Sarah laughed, her heart feeling lighter than it had all evening. "I would never change my mind. Let's get married at Christmas." "I don't want to wait either, really." Jake spun her around, making her squeal with laughter. "Christmas it is then, Mrs. Carson? I like the sound of that." "I love the sound of that," Sarah corrected, as they stood together on the porch of what would soon be their home, watching the last light fade from the sky. Sarah realized that Elizabeth's letter had actually been a gift in disguise. It had forced them both to confront any lingering doubts and emerge stronger in their commitment to each other. Jake pulled the letter from his pocket and walked over to the old fire pit behind the house. Sarah watched as he struck a match and set the paper ablaze, the flames consuming Elizabeth's words and turning them to ash that scattered on the evening wind. "There," he said, returning to her side. "Now it's official. The past is buried and the future belongs to us." Sarah leaned into his embrace, feeling completely secure in his love for the first time since the letter had arrived. Tomorrow, they would tell her father about moving up the wedding date, and they would start planning their Christmas ceremony. They had work to do and a life to build together, but tonight, as Jake walked her home under a sky full of stars, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that no letter from the past could touch what they had found together. Jake Carson had chosen her just as she had chosen him, and their love was strong enough to weather any storm. Christmas Eve arrived with a gentle snowfall that blanketed Willow Creek in pristine white. Sarah stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom, adjusting her mother's pearl necklace around her throat. The wedding dress, which she had sewn herself from ivory silk her father had ordered specially from Denver, fit perfectly, was simple but elegant, with tiny buttons down the back and long sleeves that ended in points over her hands. "And you look beautiful, daughter," Thomas said from the doorway. His voice was thick with emotion as he looked at his little girl. All grown up and ready to become Jake Carson's wife, Sarah turned to face her father, her heart full of love and gratitude. "Thank you, Papa, for everything, for accepting Jake, for helping us get ready for today, for being the best father a girl could ask for." Thomas crossed the room and took her hands in his weathered ones. "Jake's a good man, Sarah. He'll take care of you the way you deserve to be taken care of. But more than that, I can see how much he loves you. It's written all over his face every time he looks at you." "I love him so much it sometimes takes my breath away," Sarah admitted. "I never knew it was possible to feel this way about another person. That's how I felt about your mother," Thomas said softly. "Hold on to that feeling, daughter. Let it guide you through whatever challenges life brings you." A knock at the front door interrupted their conversation. Through the window, Sarah could see Mary from the diner and several other women from town arriving with covered dishes for the reception that would follow the ceremony. The entire town had been invited to celebrate, and it seemed like everyone was coming. The wedding was to be held in the small church at the end of Main Street, followed by a reception in the church hall. Jake had wanted to invite everyone in Willow Creek, saying that the community had welcomed him when he was a stranger, and he wanted to share his joy with all of them. "It's time," Thomas said, offering Sarah his arm. "Are you ready?" Took one last look around her childhood bedroom, then nodded. "I'm ready." The church was packed with friends and neighbors, all dressed in their finest clothes. Candles flickered on every surface, and someone had managed to find enough winter greenery to decorate the altar with pine boughs and red ribbons. The warm glow of the candles and the familiar faces of everyone she cared about made Sarah's heart swell with happiness. But all of that faded away when she saw Jake standing at the altar, waiting for her. He was wearing a new black suit that emphasized his broad shoulders, and his dark hair had been carefully combed back. But it was the expression on his face that took Sarah's breath away, pure love and wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe this moment was really happening, as Thomas walked her down the aisle. Sarah's eyes never left Jake's. She remembered the day he had first walked into their store, a dusty stranger passing through town. She thought about all the moments that had led them to this one, their first conversation. The evening he had dinner with her family, the morning he decided to stay, their first kiss on the porch. The night he came back wounded from chasing rustlers. The evening they had burned Elizabeth's letter together. When they reached the altar, Thomas placed Sarah's hand in Jake's and stepped back. Jake's fingers were warm and steady as they closed around hers, and when he smiled at her, Sarah felt like her heart might burst with joy. Pastor Williams opened his worn Bible and began the ceremony. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Jacob Carson and Sarah Mitchell in holy matrimony. Sarah barely heard the words. She was lost in Jake's eyes, thinking about all the dreams they had shared and all the plans they had made. After the ceremony, they would go to their own house, and begin their life as husband and wife. They would wake up together every morning and work side by side to build something lasting and beautiful. Do you, Jacob Carson, take Sarah Mitchell to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, till death do you part? Do, Jake said, his voice strong and sure. Do you, Sarah Mitchell, take Jacob Carson to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, till death do you part? I do, Sarah replied, her voice barely above. Whisper, but clear enough for everyone to hear. Jake slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, a ring he had had specially made by the jeweler in the next town over. Sarah did the same for him, marveling at how right it felt to see her ring on his finger. By the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Jake, you may kiss your bride. Jake stepped closer to Sarah, his hands coming up to frame her face in the gesture that had become so familiar to her. Would it be wrong if I kissed you now? He whispered, so quietly that only she could hear. Sarah's eyes filled with tears of pure happiness. Never, she whispered back. Never wrong. When Jake's lips met hers, the church erupted in cheers and applause. In that moment, there was only Jake, only the taste of his kiss, and the knowledge that they belonged to each other now, completely and forever. After the ceremony, everyone moved to the church hall for the reception. There was dancing and singing, and more food than the small community could possibly eat. Jake and Sarah moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and well wishes from everyone they had ever known. But as the evening wore on, Sarah found herself getting tired of sharing Jake with everyone else. She wanted to go home, to their home, and begin their married life. As if reading her thoughts, Jake appeared at her elbow. Mrs. Carson, he said formally, but with a twinkle in his eye, would you care to take a walk with your husband? Would love to, Mr. Carson, Sarah replied with equal formality. They slipped out of the hall and walked hand through the snow-covered streets to their house at the edge of town. Jake had left the lamps burning, and warm light spilled from the windows onto the snow. It looked like a picture from a fairy tale, perfect and welcoming. Jake swept Sarah up into his arms and carried her across the threshold, both of them laughing like children. He set her down gently in their living room in front of the fireplace, where a fire was already crackling merrily. Welcome home, Mrs. Carson, Jake said softly. Sarah looked around the room they had worked so hard to prepare at the furniture. They had chosen together, the curtains she had sewn, the pictures they had hung on the walls. It was theirs, all of it, the first home that truly belonged to both of them. I love you, Jake Carson, she said, reaching up to touch his cheek. And I love you, Sarah Carson, he replied. More than all the stars in the sky, more than all the land from here to Texas and back again. As they stood together in their own home, married at last, and with their whole future stretching ahead of them, Sarah knew that she would never forget. The question Jake had whispered to her so many times, would it be wrong if I kissed you now? It had become the soundtrack of their courtship, the words that marked every important moment in their journey to this perfect night. And as Jake asked the question one more time, his wife of just a few hours smiled and pulled him closer, ready to spend the rest of her life saying yes.